Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks very much. Today we're looking at student digital literacies, and in particular we're focusing on understanding the student digital experience, something that JIS has been doing a lot of work on over the years. And we'll have a view on that from Leslie Gourlay from the Institute of Education. Then the rest of our presentations today around the use of students as change agents in digital literacies. So really looking at working with students in highly engaged ways, putting a lot of power into the hands of students, both for the development of their own digital literacies, the development of digital literacies of their peers, of other students, and also to input into staff digital literacies. So you can see the projects there on the screen that are going to be presenting today. And as Marianne said, I think in her introduction earlier, there will be time to take questions after each presentation. The presentations themselves will be pretty short to enable us to take all those different viewpoints, but we will be taking about 5 minutes after each slot for questions from participants. And so do please post your questions in the chat box. We'll be picking those up and feeding them to the presenters. And then there'll be about 15 minutes for discussion at the end to try and pull things together. So I will now hand over to Leslie from the Institute of Education.
Thanks very much for that. I'm going to just crack on because I know it's only 5 minutes. I'll just start by introducing a little bit about our project at the Institute of Education. Basically, the first year, I'm going to focus on that more today than the second year work, has consisted of a longitudinal case study approach towards finding out more detail about student digital literacy practices in an attempt to try to get into some detail about this. And I'm going to talk today a little bit about, very briefly about the data, but more about how this kind of data can be collected and used in various ways. I mean, we framed this as a research project, but also obviously a development project with a view to making changes within the institution and hopefully providing some insights to the field and to other institutions as well. We started with looking at the existing survey data that we had, which was the iGraduate data, and we found it to be, obviously it's not intended for this type of purpose, and there's very little really that we could get out of that in terms of digital literacies. So we did 4 focus groups. Looking at, you can see on the slide 4 different main groups that we identified at the Institute. Again, I don't have time to go into detail about the findings of those focus groups, but really what the main things for today I think that's significant was that each of these different groups of students, even within a specialist postgraduate institution like the Institute, were really rather different in their engagements with technologies and their preoccupations, the types of strategies that they were using. So this led us to the next stage, which was in which we gave each student, we got 12 volunteers from that the same group, the focus groups, represent 3 from each of the 4 categories. And over 9 to 12 months, we asked them to take photos and videos to represent their practice and their engagement with texts and technologies in particular. We did a series of interviews, 3 or 4 interviews with each student, and we used the images and the video to a large extent as the basis for those interviews. So very, very strongly student-driven and shaped around the student experience. I'm going really quickly, so obviously if there are questions, people can ask later. And just to give you a flavour of the data, we've got an image there of an iPad on the edge of the bath, and one of our students, one of her digital literacy practices was to, you can see the second picture, she liked to digitize everything, and so she microwaved a book and put it through a mass sort of scanner and then put it onto her iPad. And this was an example of what we came to characterize as curation, which was one of the strategies that we saw across the data set. Some students, and all students at different times, dealt with the kind of volume complexity of engagement with digital text by trying to curate them in some sense and trying to kind of control it or trying to render it into a a format that they could deal with, and she would read it in the bath, which we found quite interesting, in a Ziploc bag. So there you go. But we also had two other categories. Combat was another important category where students felt a distrust of technologies and took a sort of adversarial kind of approach, and we felt, towards the technologies, both institutional and non-institutional, that they had to negotiate. And coping was another major strategy. But I don't have time to get into these analytical categories today, but we have got more information on the website, which I'll show you the link for in a second. So that's a really, really fast introduction to some of the data. But of course, these aren't just conjectures on the basis of the pictures. It came through with the interview analysis as well. But more importantly, for today's purposes, what would be the point in doing this type of data collection? It's very time consuming. That's one of the downsides of it, I will say. And we gave the students the iPod Touch handheld devices as an incentive. But these days, I think you can't assume all students have camera phones, but a lot of them do. So I think you can do it without necessarily having devices to give students. How I think it's useful, actually I'll miss the first bullet there tells you some of the uses that we've put it to at the Institute particularly, so you can get a flavour of that. But maybe more generally, I see two kind of ways of using this type of multimodal rich kind of data, which is very much about the sort of day-to-day lived experience of technologies. I think it gives us a sense of a narrative and a kind of a detail, a sort of granularity about the day-to-day student engagement. The interview data, alone I don't think provides. I think it can lead to a lot of abstraction with students making generalizations rather than really reflecting more deeply on their practice. So I think that's one of the big positive points about this type of work, is that it can really provide insights. It also puts the student in the role of a kind of co-investigator as well, rather than being the kind of subject of research, and I think that's quite important. So I think that's very useful from a research and development point of view. Very brief, I'm just wrapping up. Another thing I would say about it is that it's a very powerful resource for the creation of developmental activities and to allow people, staff and students, to reflect on practice. And it's something that Martin Oliver and I are doing at the Institute. We're thinking about moving this forward. We've got an internal conference coming up where we're going to do some activities around things like mapping and images to help students to reflect on staff to reflect on their own digital practices, and also to use these student images to shed light on some of the complexities of the student experience. So I think it can be very, very persuasive, very personal, and very kind of visceral almost, this type of data, which I think can be a good complement to other types of inquiry. I don't want to take up too much time, so I'll just move on. I've provided a few links here if you want to find out more. The first two are, the first one is our blog, the second one is our official JISC website, and then we've got our slide shares as well, with various slideshows from the project if you want some more detail. And I just want to, in the chat box, I want to just, if I don't do it this second, I'll do it soon, post a couple of announcements, because we have an event at Society for Research in Higher Education on digital literacies on the 10th of May. I'll paste the link in a minute. And also we have extended the deadline for a special issue of Research and Learning Technologies on Digital Literacies until the 15th of May. So I'm sorry, I'm using my opportunity to plug both of those things. But I'll stop now and hand back. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Leslie. I wonder if you could start this questions session by saying a bit more about what the key messages were that came out of that data, or what sort of thing did need to change at your institution in the light of what came back from that data, whichever is easiest to tackle, really.
Sure, yeah. I think I'll go back a slide actually to address that. One of the very practical points is this third, smaller bullet point on this slide about, I beg your pardon, sorry, the top one, about the establishment of an IT user group. We did have student consultation feeding into policy development in this area, but we were able to persuade the institution, the right people in the institution, that through the focus groups actually, to start with, that we needed to have a more differentiated access to these different 4 groups because their needs were so different, the way that they were using technologies was so different, that we felt that there was a need for those 4 sections to be heard. So now the IT user group has representation from each of those 4 categories that we identified in the project. So I think that's quite important because that's now part of institutional process. So I think that's something that we did discover, was that we needed a more, certainly we didn't want a generic notion of digital literacies that was kind of reductive. We were actually trying to recognise diversity as opposed to looking for commonality. And I think what we're hoping to sort of move forward with is that kind of slightly more nuanced approach to informing policy. I don't know if that addresses the question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I'll just pick up, there's a question there in the chat box from Tom Lunt saying, you mentioned power to students. Did you see any effects from using things like asynchronous chat, where the normal student-tutor power relationships were disturbed by the use of that sort of thing?
So that's a really interesting question, but I don't really know if we actually did get data on that particular point. We did work with 4 students who are pure distance, or geographically distant, and their entire engagement with the IOE, some of them had never physically been to the IOE or to London for the purpose of the course. Their whole engagement was through Blackboard Collaborate, or Illuminate actually at the time, and Moodle. So there was a lot of discussion with those students about, I guess, more about community than power actually, because it was very semi-structured open interviews where the students were, encouraged to come up with, their own concerns. And what came through quite strongly with that group of students was the extent to which they felt part of the institution or not. And I think they didn't really to the extent that they wanted to, and we saw a lot of back-channel strategies like using Skype so that they could do video because they wanted to see each other. But they didn't talk quite so much about tutor relationships, but then they are all mature students and they're all postgraduates and they're mid-career, quite senior people, so maybe for them the power issue wasn't quite so important as it might be in an undergraduate setting.
That's interesting, thanks very much. I think we'll move on now to Liz at Exeter, talking about their work with students as change agents.
Hi Liz, I think you just need to click the talk button as well. I know it's having to do 2 things. I did that earlier.
I didn't appreciate that. Hi, I'm Liz from Exeter. I'm going to be talking about students as change agents and change agents in relation to digital practice. To us in Exeter, as I know in other institutions as well, change agents is quite high profile and a philosophy really about the way that we work with students, empowering them. So I'm not going to read this quote, but I think what underpins the way that I think and that we work is that we've been very good as institutions listening to students and responding to them, but actually it's quite different if you give them the power to bring about change. And we see that as linking quite strongly into the notion of students as consumers and moving away from that kind of approach so that they actually engage collaboratively with the institution. Our Cascade, our DISC project, had several objectives. So we were looking to implement research-rich initiatives in 5 colleges. And that's been very important to us because there are some clear differences in relation to digital scholarship according to the discipline and according to the college. And we've been providing professional development and have lots of resources for staff and students. But what I'm going to talk about today is the strand where we've been using postgraduate students as change agents, pioneers, to support student and staff development. What will be apparent to all of you, I'm sure, is that students, postgraduates in particular, are much better versed in a range of technologies than many of the academics. And so the notion of cascade is that you can cascade knowledge and information, expertise, experience in any direction, so that students can be talking to staff about the technologies they use and supporting staff in using new technology. Postgraduates can be cascading to undergraduates and so on. We developed a group of 17 interns. We hadn't expected to have that many, but we had so many volunteers. So we had quite a large group. They were mostly postgraduate researchers embedded in their disciplines, and we gave them payments for up to £600. In fact, they did far more work than that £600 was worth, many of them. But as postgraduates, unlike some of our undergraduates, they were adamant that they couldn't do anything unless they were paid for it. And I think that reflects the kind of people they are. A lot of them are older, more mature students, and they need means of funding themselves. What we did was, Helen Beetham in particular as part of this project, engaging them in group activities, lots of skills sharing amongst themselves, and then developing a literacy project of their own choice, and then they wrote a case study about it. And all these details are on our Cascade website, but I'm not going to give you that web address at this moment, though if you Googled Cascade you'd find it, because we're just translating it into a new shell, so it's a bit of a mess just at this moment in time. What we found, I thought was quite interesting, is that these interns worked in very, very different ways, and you can give them ways of describing what students are doing, a multitude of different terminologies, so these may cut across some of the terminologies that are being used by other institutions or not, but basically we found that students were supporters. They share their expertise with each other and the ways that they work with technology. And we had some wonderful sessions where they were doing this. And they were quite simple things for postgraduates, but just looking at their favourite referencing tools. And a lot of students, as an outcome of that session, changed the ways that they were doing referencing. So there's high impact. And students that are producers or creators, so developing resources, and I know this is common practice now across a lot of institutions. So we've had them producing all kinds of online resources, say for international students, and someone developing a Facebook site, other things like the development of robots in engineering for use by other students. And then I reserved eventually this notion of pioneers for those students who are working in their subject areas and using their own technologies in new and often very exciting ways, finding new uses for technology, for example, data visualization and presentation. So in terms of the notion of pioneer, it was useful to us to keep it within the subject area, pushing forward with their subject. And then we had a very different kind of student, I think, who was actually, in my terms, a transformative agent of change. Students who were really, really strongly motivated by change. And in fact, when we interviewed them before they joined this project, some of them actually came in talking about the concept of change agents that they expected to transform the culture for this project, obviously just in their subject area or the department. But I felt that some of them really wanted to go back into new contexts. Many of them were international students and bring about change in their own cultures, in their own countries. And we've had some lovely examples, for example, a student in drama who has completely changed the ways that people talk in the subject area by having what she calls kitchen table conversations. And again, we can see the impact of that on a multitude of different students and also, in that case, staff. So I don't know whether it matters that we have these different ways of describing what students do, but I think because we're quite a long way down thinking what change agents are and pioneers are, it does help us to be more explicit to the institution and therefore about how we can work with students in the long term. But in terms of sustainability, the ways of working of the project will be very, very difficult to continue because there isn't continued funding. And so it's really, again, coming back to this notion of philosophy. How do we embed this idea that anybody can be an expert and anybody can talk to anybody about using technology and have this real sense of collaborative sharing of expertise, no matter what level you're working. And I think that's all I want to say now. So if there's any questions.
Thanks very much, Liz. There's a question just there from Terry McAndrew from TechList and the Academy. Does HE generally keep up to date with school and college digital literacy practices and build on them? Interesting question.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. What we've got as an outcome of partly of this project is some lovely quiz material where we're looking at what skills and attitudes students have, and also in another GIST project we've been looking very much at first year students and what they bring in with them. And as I think most of us know these days, students, wherever they come from, just come with the most extraordinary range of different skills, and whereas we'd expected that most students would actually be able to build on digital literacy from the past, many of them don't seem to have any skills beyond using their iPhones and Facebook, and they don't seem to be able to translate that into being able to explore new technologies. They're very, very reticent, we found, about trying things unless they're given support by staff or people like us in central services to do so. So that notion of building is very, very complex, and I don't think we're anywhere near doing that very deliberately yet, though obviously we're trying. And I think the project practice, I mean, when you see more of, say, Oxford Brookes or even Westminster's projects, I think that's far more what those projects are trying to do.
Thanks, Liz. Yes, it's certainly a finding we're seeing replicated elsewhere, and a lot of the data over the years has shown that students don't seem to come in and be able to automatically transfer those skills that they do, or many of them will undoubtedly have for their personal life. We've just got a minute for a quick question. Someone's asking, is it a different picture if you're dealing with settings where the students are mature adults in terms of skill sets and how they participate in initiatives around digital literacies?
I think what has been fascinating to me, getting to know some of these students, is the maturity in which they discuss what they're doing and the way that they've been able to move forward some of the creations, for example. But in many ways, undergraduates, if they're interested, it's more to do with motivations, I think, than actually level of students. So I'm going to have to say that I've been absolutely astounded working with these postgraduate students, how engaged they are, and I would just love to spend more time with them. I feel really privileged that we've had a project that's been working with them.
Thanks, and on that note, I think we'll leave it and have to move on. But I think it is the quality of the student work across the programme has been so impressive. We've certainly been really impressed to see it. We're now going to move on to Mark Kerrigan at Greenwich, and I believe some of the students there.
Hi, sir. Can you hear me okay?
You seem a bit quiet.
Okay, I'll speak. Oh, good read. Yeah, so yeah, as I say, we're here with a couple of students as well, because one of the things we were going to talk about were sort of ideas and thoughts about running these things, and opposed to me sort of saying and suggesting, I thought students would actually give their honest and candid views on this as well. So before we get to that, we're just going back a little bit and introduce the project and what we're trying to do at Greenwich. So the project at Greenwich is this project here, and it really is looking at the student journey, and it's a student journey and the transitions they make from arriving at university, moving through university, and then exiting university into the further study, employment, or whatever else it may be. And really what we want to try and do is develop and support the students' digital literacy as they move through it, aligned to that with the development of graduate attributes. So in other words, as students move through those 4 core stages of educational journey, how do we recognise that digital literacy and digital skills that they have, and then how can we adapt and support them so when they leave university, they're equipped to succeed in whatever they wish to do. Now because this project is really about transition, early on what we really noticed was academics have a very good idea of their perceptions of the student journey and what they perceive as transition, but that may not necessarily reflect what the students are receiving and what the students' view is, and particularly across the whole institution. So which is why we really engage students very early on from the project as these change agents, because they have a very good idea of what their peers are experiencing, and they can really get the rich data that we need to design support mechanisms and ideas to support students on their journey. So we have a series of change agents, so we use a scholarship model here as well. So we offer the students about £1,500 for a series of work. The students are recruited through separate processes, and I'll come along to them in a second. But really important to our project, again going back to the richness of this data, is things about the students that we're working with and the outcomes of the project. Well, we decided very early on, again, that to make sure that the project was successful, we need to work with students from across the entire university, and also getting students to work from different academic years, both undergraduate and postgraduate. So it really was this interdisciplinary nature that was pivotal to this. Getting students to work with other students who they don't ordinarily see, so that's the internal enrichment as change agents as well, but then from what they're producing to the project. So from an interdisciplinary point of view, it also really supports buy-in from the entire university. We're split across multiple faculties here as well. So students representing all the faculties then were moving back into the faculty saying, look at some of the works and the ideas that we're doing. These students act as a wedge to go into there, which is quite exciting. As I say, we work with students of different academic years and different subjects. So one of the things that we're very keen on is why students want to work with us, and it's how does the project enrich change agents themselves. And by students engaging with other students from different disciplines, they get the personal enrichment that can then be evidence in their CV, their activities, and their own personal development. So as well as getting the scholarship, there's a whole host of other benefits that these students see. So we're going to get this excellent mix of skills and abilities, which is great. Again, from our point of view, we needed a variety of skills, and that helped do that for us. And as I say, it really does provide a true representation of the student body. That was nice. So one of the things, again, we were asked to talk about was recruitment. We also regarded very early on that you have to align the recruitment strategy of change agents to what the students want to do. So we wanted students to be very diverse with a whole skill set. So we decided that just by having an application form and an interview is not necessarily the best way to get the students that we need. So we created an application process whereby students could apply in any way they wish. They could be by video, by dance, by poem, really demonstrating what they could bring to the project. And that really helped to enrich the value of the students that we ended up working with, which actually did work exceptionally well. So then, to think about the students themselves, how do we actually go about it? I'll happily hand you over to both James and Kate. Just some thoughts from the students' point of view on how to do these sort of things. And you can be as candid as you like.
Okay, so the first thing which we really had to address was our communication skills. We found it was quite a good idea to have skills where we could kind of talk to students and staff, and it was really about understanding the needs of students, and it was definitely about getting written feedback and the changes that the students wanted.
One of the experiences of our project that we've had so far is because we're intimately connected with the students, we can see how they're developing with the iPads in the labs, how they're being used, and discussions involving them. We've had very open discussions with the students about how they're feeling about the process and how it's integrated into their learning. And we're also basing focus groups onto how we can further develop it and what issues that they want to focus on most, and what impact it's had on their learning, not in labs, but within their entire experience with learning education.
Definitely. I mean, I've been having a look at the data the students are generating, and it is so rich that we wouldn't have been able to get it ourselves as academics, but the value of students engaging other students, the richness of that data and how that data then can help transform what we're going to be doing, it is very exciting. And I think that's our 5 minutes. So that's just very briefly some of the things that we're doing at Greenwich, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much to all of you there at Greenwich. Can I just, it's not your audio is not terribly clear, so when answering questions, can you just speak particularly slowly? I don't think you can do much about aeroplanes flying overhead, but there's been quite a few questions about the use of badges. Are you using badges, and if so, what tips can you share on how that works?
Badges, we're thinking about badges for the transitional elements. So we've created a sort of transition framework that has 12 areas that we're exploring, which are designed to support the student's journey. And what we're doing, we're about to make our thoughts around this open and really want to get some feedback on badges. Currently think about badging the curriculum and activities. So when, for example, you take an activity that a member of staff may be doing, how can that activity maybe change slightly or enhance to meet these criteria around the student journey? And then by allocating badges to that. So when one looks at the curriculum holistically, you can see which areas are strong, which are potentially missing. So currently it's not awarding badges to students, although that's something I'm quite keen to explore in the future. I've got quite a few things I'm really excited about trying to do, but currently it really is just looking at almost kite marking what's happening in the curriculum and documenting change. That's currently where we are with badges.
Thanks. There's also been quite a lot of interest in the chat box about your model of critical digital literacy, Mark. So when you get off the mic, could you share the URL for where that is on your website, please? And just a comment from me, I think also from the comments that your students had there, and also some of the things that, well, I was struck by that what they're mentioning most is things around sort of research skills, communication skills, organisational skills, and it links to the point I think Liz was making, that it's not about being an expert in technology. This change agent is sort of investigative pioneer role. That's just a part of it, and in some ways it's not the big part of it. The big part of it is all those other skills about the more traditional scholarship skills, if you like, of embedding it in an academic context.
Yeah, I mean, I would completely agree. The students that we chose, we didn't say, can you do X, Y, or Z? We were looking for people with this entrepreneurial thinking, or either identifying and seeing the situation, seeing how they can use what they have to explore and enhance. So I completely agree with that, definitely.
Brilliant. Well, we'll move on to Oxford Brookes, but I have noted Terry's question, and we'll come back to that in the question time at the end. And hopefully, Mark, if you and your students as well, can stay around to question time at the end in case there's any other questions for them. Thank you. So, Richard.
Hi, everybody. Richard Francis here from Oxford Brookes. I'm also hoping that Rory, one of our e-pioneers, is going to be able to join in. I can see he's in the room with us, but not physically in the same room as me. So hello, Rory. I hope you're with us today. Rory is saying hi. That's great. Yeah, well, we do seem to be very much within a strand here, which we've heard from Exeter and Greenwich is being taken forward in other establishments as well. So what I think we need to focus on is how the student e-pioneers differ from the Cascade interns and the Greenwich students in some key ways. First, let me just give you a brief overview of where we're starting from. in Brooks, we're pursuing many forms of student engagement, but my feeling is that it's all too easy for these initiatives to become subservient to a dominant ethos of consumerism. That sounds like quite a provocative statement, but I think it echoes some of the things that Liz was saying earlier on. It does tend to be a bit similar to market research for product enhancement. You tell us what you want and we'll try to give it to you. And I think that's something which this project needs to try to overcome. And perhaps the idea of a partnership is a different way of approaching the concept of students as change agents, rather than simply that of listening to what the students want in a rather crude sense. So the project promotes the idea of partnership as a relationship, and the parties in that relationship have complementary skills. And again, that echoes quite a few of the things that were said earlier on. And we'll hopefully be able to hear from Rory how that works in practice. It also seeks to establish some new and hopefully transformative roles for students across disciplines. We have got a series of roles which have been teased out by the research that went on prior to this project, and the kinds of roles that students have been performing in partnership, which I'll list shortly. And again, just reiterating what Sarah was saying a few seconds ago, digital literacy is really just the vehicle for this. It isn't actually necessarily the thing of primary concern in the sense of how the students are acting as change agents. Let me just advance this. There we go. Here we go. So these are the pioneer roles that we have been trying to develop. This is about how the pioneers partner with staff. The first three, trainer, mentor, and resource creator, and I should say that most of these are undergraduates in these roles. The three have really become quite firmly established through the scheme. We've had 3 cohorts of pioneers going through, and there have always been trainers, mentors, and resource creators operating in each of those cohorts. The last 2, researcher and entrepreneur, I would say are still in pilot, or only just starting to happen, and they're in pilot. But researcher has got further than entrepreneur in as much as the work that the students are doing in relation to how different parts of the university can use particularly social media more effectively in communication with the student body and, well, between the students and the institution. It can be seen as being co-investigation and possibly leading to research output. So that is something which is happening within the project remit. And the entrepreneurial role, well, that's only just starting to happen, and of course we're nowhere near as far along the line as perhaps Greenwich or even Exeter. And that is partly because our e-pioneers are voluntary as opposed to paid. But those are the 5 roles, and they still seem to be quite appropriate. They seem to be, they do seem to cover most of the activities that our e-pioneers have pursued. So just a very brief overview of how e-pioneers are recruited and the commissioning process. The way in which the partnerships actually then manifest themselves is through commissions that staff create. There's a semestral recruitment, which is done by principal lecturers for the student experience. That's an academic post with special responsibility for the implementation of the student experience strategy in each faculty. And they're assisted by a liaison officer who works with the ILM, the professional association that we're working with, and with our in-step communications intern who keeps in touch with the new recruits afterwards. That we provide consultancy and e-pioneer training through careers and the learning support staff in the library and IT services and learning technologists. And then we commission our faculty and directorate staff commission e-pioneers to partner on small-scale digital literacy development initiatives. The commissions are signed off by the project. That's done through a very simple sort of Google web form process, and the spreadsheet is kept and monitored. The commissions are signed off by the project team and then handed over to the pioneer community to self-assign themselves. How much training do the students receive? Roughly weekly during semesters, although I would say the total is probably about 8 sessions because obviously they tail off as you reach the end of the semester. Thanks for that question. The principal lecturers to the student experience manager and monitor the process of progress rather and delivery of the commissions, and then on the completion of the commissions, if the students accompany their outputs, the work, with a reflective portfolio, they're eligible for an ILM endorsed consultancy certificate. It's a course which the Career Services have invented for this project called Future Consultants. So that actually is the payoff rather than the financial one as far as the pioneers are concerned. There have been quite a few examples of how this is beginning to affect change in institutional practices. It's quite widespread. All the faculties and 3 of the directorates have become engaged. And via the student experience strategy, we have got some support which is influencing the way in which the CZ strategy is being implemented. So, for example, there's a research assistant evaluating the project, and we're getting matched funding for our principal lecturers from the PVC for the student experience. I'll just skip to the next point. The POSEs as partnership leads in all faculties are acting as line managers for the ePioneers, so there's a change in their practice which involves a systematic working with ePioneers, and they're also cascading this partnership for digital literacy development to their faculty colleagues, which again is something which is beginning to affect change across the faculties. And they also are liaising with faculty learning technologists in some quite imaginative ways as well. So again, that's broadening the remit, if you like, of the learning technologists themselves. They've also been co-organizing our learning and teaching conference, which is a distinct change in orientation in that area. I think there's also, generally speaking, an increased awareness of the range of student partnership roles which are possible in this context. So this is the key point, I think, that I want to make, that this project has, I think, shed new light on the way in which students can work in partnership, and the vehicle being digital literacy just in this case, but it would be applicable in a number of different areas, I think. The critical self-awareness and self-confidence building is as important as the digital literacy capabilities themselves, and the desire to affect change is something which comes across as a very strong motivator for the pioneers. Very much the negotiation of roles, outcomes and deliverables, and the attraction of role switching, particularly amongst the undergraduate pioneers, is definitely a motivator. There's a sense that there is a shared responsibility for digital literacy development, because working with staff, the pioneers see where their complementary skills do lie. And there's very much a sense of giving value to some of the personal literacies, maybe we could call them, such as project and time management, which perhaps get slightly overlooked in some other contexts. There's a career choice insight. There's insight into how this process can affect career choices, and there's a confidence to seek employment opportunities within the institution. We've had 2 examples of internships, and one ePioneer changing her career plans to as a result of being an ePioneer towards teaching. And finally, there's an impact on the curriculum development, which is again about change in practice. The new academic pathway for work-based learning, the pioneers are using very small numbers as yet, only 2, but the pioneers are taking up this opportunity to use their experience towards academic credit on an independent study module. And of course, we've already mentioned that they are having an impact on some of our strategic initiatives, like the rollout of our BLE, which we changed to Moodle a year ago, and then helping us to develop good practice guidelines for social constructivist learning within Moodle. That's something which is only just beginning to happen now, but it's definitely a result of involving the ePioneers in the way in which we have rolled Moodle out. And then we can also see that students becoming involved in some review processes. So our librarians are looking at reading this process reviews, and students will be involved in that. They've commissioned ePioneers to be involved in that. And then finally, there's a sense that the commissions work best when they are responding to the needs of teams, professional groups within the universities, maybe they student support coordinators or program development teams or dyslexia support teams. This is something which seems to have resulted from the process of commissioning students. I'd like to hand over briefly to Rory, if I can. Rory, are you with us? And I was hoping Rory could tell us just a little about the experience of working on commissions and the development that he's felt this has meant for him.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you just great. Hi,
Yeah.
Rory.
Oh, that's good. Right, so Rich has given a very good background to the ePioneer project, and I'm just going to talk a bit about the commissions that I did as an ePioneer and the impact that it had on me and on the institution. So I did a consultancy type commission with the student services team at the university who were dissatisfied with their website. I was an ePioneer and I had also done my dissertation in web design, so I was able to understand the scope of their commission. The work was a sort of usability evaluation of a web page and me giving my input into suggested improvements of their page. This is all done remotely with email contact. So as well as lending my technical knowledge to help them restructure their web page, the commission provided me an opportunity to work professionally with staff in the university in a digital environment. That's the important thing because face-to-face communication was limited. We had to establish common use of Google Docs, Google Mail and calendars to share our work and ideas and meet each other. Now that I work full-time at the university, I know that this kind of digital contact is almost ubiquitous. But while I was a student, doing the commission gave me an insight into these professional working styles. Doing the commission increased my self-awareness, obviously, because I was able to see the impact of my work and opinions, which added value to my academic study as well. I continued these professional working styles in another commission, which was a mentor type commission, which just involved mentoring a member of academic staff in the use of Moodle and social media in her course. This also involved a lot of digital communication between the two of us, but also required more hands-on time in her office where we discussed her requirements for communicating with students on her course and the different tools available for this communication. As I was a student, I was able to give a genuine insight into which tools I thought were good for learning and teaching. And from her, I gained an understanding of the problems that members of staff do face in the digital environment. I was therefore experiencing the staff-student partnership firsthand. The partnerships I was involved in allowed me to stand out as an intuitive student and use my knowledge to solve real-world problems, and also gave me the experience of working professionally and experiencing behind the scenes at university. This kind of partnership familiarized me with the institution more, and as such, it enabled me to be a more confident student, which is an example of the personal development that was brought from the partnership. The partnership also closes the bridge between staff and student, which encourages staff. It gives them the opportunity to take advantage of the expertise of their students and to use this expertise that students have as a resource in helping them structure their courses. So it really is mutual benefits.
Thanks, Rory. I think that's exactly what I was just going to say. That it's such a good, that example is such a good example of the way it is so mutually beneficial. Thanks very much to Rory and Richard from Oxford Books. We're into the sort of general discussion time now. I was wondering if we could come back to the students at Greenwich and just ask them a bit about, firstly, what was the motive? What did you think you were going to get out of this when you got involved with it, and has that matched your expectations? What have you got out of it, both in terms of sort of ongoing skills going forward, and how is it linked or not linked with your other academic work?
Sorry, could you repeat the question for you? It sort of just spaced out a little bit at the end.
Hi, yes. It was a bit of a question of many parts. What what made you sign up for this in the first place? What did you think you were going to get out of it? What have you got out of it? And how is it linked or not linked with your academic work?
When I applied for this, the main thing I wanted to do is have more of an impact on digital learning. Coming from a background where everything's just written down and in books, it's nice to have a sort of option to enhance learning in a different way, not for myself but also for others, and that's why I wanted to follow with the course, because it can only help you develop your employability skills with the way digital learning is going nowadays.
Yeah, and I joined the project because I think digital learning has quite a big place in higher education and education in general, and I'd like to be part of the movement and help bring that to the university.
Okay, thanks very much. For me, a bit of a potentially tricky issue is that I can see all those things about employability skills. It does seem such fantastic experience. All these projects we've been talking about. Is there a question of equity in terms of there must be a limit on the number of students that can get involved in these initiatives in an institution, and are those students getting a richer experience than some other students? And if so, is that's just the way it goes, or is there an issue there, particularly around students who may have other pressures in their life that mean that maybe they're not well placed to take that sort of role on? Sorry, that was to anyone who would like to take it.
Could I just say that the scale of the ePioneer partnerships is much smaller than we had originally imagined it might be. So in terms of numbers, there is a smallish number, but it does seem to me that the impact of what they do can be quite considerable, and therefore the question of equity really is more to do with how many people can benefit from this kind of relationship rather than those who actually put themselves forward. That's at least how we're seeing that particular question at the moment.
I think the ways that we work at Exeter are much more informal, and we have been working at it for quite a few years now in terms of change agents. So if we look at undergraduates and postgraduates across the whole university, including digital literacy, but much more broad than that as well, we probably have about 50 or 60 different projects that students are taking the initiative for across the institution. And these are much more becoming embedded in the colleges rather than organised from the centre. And so we've deliberately worked at a strategy, because your question is really, really important to us. But we have decided that some students want to do this, they want to take on a leadership role, and many of those students actually will be the leaders of the future, and it's very important as an institution that we are stretching some of those who really, really want to engage, and that they're getting opportunities maybe beyond the everyday opportunities. And I suppose at Exeter we're quite lucky in that most students are campus-based. Although we have a lot of working students, they're not having to work very, very long hours to survive. So we don't actually have that problem of students not being able to engage because of working or living a long way away. Interesting, we do see a slight difference between the science subjects and, let's say, arts and humanities, because the number of contact hours from most science subjects is enormously more than other subjects, and so those students do find it harder to find the time to engage.
Okay, thanks very much, Liz. Mark, did you want to say something about the Student Change Agent network that Greenwich and Partners has set up sort of on the back of some of this digital literacies work?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sarah. So one of the things that we were asked to do was to develop a network to support both staff and students working with change agents, or those people who may want to do that in the future. I'll put a link in the chat box. But really what it's designed to do is either students who are currently in that role to work with other students out nationally to get some ideas and support each other. So, for example, someone working at Greenwich hasn't taken the problem? Is there someone at Exeter who potentially has overcome that or enhanced it? So the idea of the network is to provide that dialogue and support for people in that role. And the second area really is to support institutions who, as I say, want to move into that area. So getting people together who have experience of working in very different capacities, and how can you learn from and move forward. So it's very much an enhancement network and moving things forward quickly. So instead of having to make the same mistakes we made 2 years ago, for example, people can actually move past that. So that's what the network is for. As I say, it's currently quite new. I'll put the link in there, but we really are encouraging all staff and students who are interested in the change agent agenda, particularly around digital literacies, to really engage, and it'd be great to hear from them.
Thanks very much, Mark, and I've popped the link in the chat box while you were talking. Actually, looking at the time, I probably better wrap that up now, because I know people have probably got places to go. I'd love to just dive into the differences in disciplines that I think Terry's mentioned and has sort of been mentioned as well in passing, but I think we might have to park that one for possibly another webinar. So I'd like to thank all the participants and all the speakers loads for taking part in this. Thank you very much.